Sister Catherine knelt in the chapel of St. Mary's Convent, her weathered hands clasped in prayer before the wooden crucifix that had been her silent companion for 25 years. The afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor where she had spent countless hours in contemplation and service. At 43, her face bore the serene expression of someone who had found peace in devotion, though beneath that tranquility lay memories she had long tried to suppress. The sharp ring of the telephone in Mother Superior's office pierced the sacred silence. Sister Catherine continued her prayers, accustomed to the outside world, occasionally intruding upon their cloistered life. But when young Sister Maria appeared at the chapel door, her face pale with urgency, Catherine knew something was wrong. "Sister Catherine," Maria whispered, approaching carefully. "Mother Superior needs to see you immediately. There's been a call." Catherine rose slowly, her knees protesting after the long hours of prayer. As she walked through the familiar corridors lined with portraits of saints and martyrs, she felt an inexplicable dread settling in her chest. The last time she had been summoned urgently was when her mother had passed away 15 years ago. A death she had learned about 3 days after the funeral, her father having decided she didn't deserve to know in time to attend. Mother Superior sat behind her desk, her expression grave. The elderly woman had been Catherine's guide and confidant through the most difficult periods of her religious life, understanding without judgment the complex circumstances that had brought the young woman to their doors decades ago. "Catherine, please sit," Mother Superior said gently. "I've received a call from St. Vincent's Hospital in the city. Your father, he's dying. He's been asking for you." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. 25 years of silence, 25 years of unanswered letters she had stopped sending after the first year, 25 years of birthdays and holidays without acknowledgement. And now, on his deathbed, he wanted to see her. Chapter 2. Memories of Force. As Catherine sat in stunned silence, memories flooded back with unwelcome clarity. She was 18 again, standing in her childhood bedroom while her father paced angrily before her, his face red with rage and disappointment. The pregnancy test had been positive, and the boy responsible had fled town the moment he learned the news, leaving her alone to face her father's wrath. "You've brought shame upon this family," he had thundered, his voice echoing through their modest home. "Your mother would be rolling in her grave if she knew what you've become." And Catherine remembered how those words had cut deeper than any physical blow. Her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her alone with a man whose love had always seemed conditional on her perfection. The pregnancy had shattered that illusion completely. "You have two choices," her father had declared, his voice cold and final. "You can go to that home for unwed mothers and give the baby away, then disappear from this town forever. Or you can enter the convent and dedicate your life to God as penance for your sin. Either way, no one in this community will ever know about your disgrace." The choice hadn't really been a choice at all. At 18, pregnant and terrified, with no money and no support system, the convent had seemed like the only option that might allow her to keep some connection to her faith and perhaps find peace. She had never imagined it would mean never seeing her father again, never being allowed to contact her few remaining relatives, never being part of a family. "Sister Catherine," Mother Superior's voice brought her back to the present. "I know this is difficult. Your relationship with your father, we've discussed it many times over the years. But he's dying and he's specifically asked for you. The decision is yours, but I believe you should consider going." Catherine looked up at the woman who had become more of a mother to her than her own father had ever been a parent. "What if I can't forgive him? What if seeing him only brings back all the pain I've worked so hard to overcome?" "Then that's something you'll have to work through. But Catherine, you've spent 25 years wondering about the man who shaped your destiny. Perhaps it's time to face him, not for his sake, but for your own peace. Name. Chapter 3. The journey back. The ride to the city felt like traveling through time. Catherine hadn't left the convent grounds in over 5 years, and the world outside seemed alien and overwhelming. The sounds of traffic, the sight of people hurrying along sidewalks, the constant buzz of modern life, all of it felt foreign to someone who had spent decades in the quiet rhythm of monastic life. As the taxi pulled up to St. Vincent's Hospital, Catherine's heart raced with anxiety. She had imagined this moment countless times over the years, but never under these circumstances. In her imagination, her father had come to the convent, humbled and repentant, asking for her forgiveness. She had never pictured herself walking into a hospital to watch him die. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and sorrow. Catherine's habit drew curious glances from visitors and staff, but she kept her eyes focused ahead, following the room numbers until she found 314. Outside the door, she paused, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. Through the small window, she could see him, a frail, elderly man who bore little resemblance to the imposing figure who had dominated her childhood. His hair was white and thin, his face gaunt and aged, his body dwarfed by the hospital bed and surrounded by machines that beeped rhythmically, marking time in his final days. For a moment she considered turning around. She could tell Mother Superior that she had tried but couldn't go through with it. She could return to her peaceful life at the convent and let this man die without the confrontation that might destroy the equilibrium she had worked so hard to achieve. But something deeper than fear or resentment compelled her forward. Perhaps it was her faith, perhaps it was simply the human need for closure. But she found herself pushing open the door and stepping into the room where her father lay dying. His eyes opened at the sound of her footsteps, and for a moment neither of them spoke. 25 years of separation hung between them like a vast chasm that neither knew how to bridge. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You came." Chapter 4. The Dying Man. Catherine stood at the foot of the hospital bed, maintaining distance while studying the man who had once seemed so powerful and now appeared broken and vulnerable. The machines monitoring his vital signs created a steady rhythm that underscored the gravity of the moment. She noticed his hands, once strong and commanding, now thin and spotted with age, trembling slightly as they rested on the white hospital blanket. "The doctors say I have maybe days, possibly hours," he said, his voice strained but determined. "I wasn't sure you would come. I wasn't sure I deserved for you to come." Catherine remained silent, her training in the convent having taught her the value of listening before speaking. Part of her wanted to unleash 25 years of accumulated pain and resentment. To tell him exactly how his decision had shaped her life, how many nights she had cried herself to sleep feeling abandoned and unloved. But another part of her, the part that had been shaped by years of prayer and reflection, urged patience and compassion. "I know what you must think of me," he continued, struggling to prop himself up slightly in the bed. "I know what I took from you. Your choice, your freedom, your chance at a normal life. I've lived with that knowledge every day for 25 years. The admission hung in the air between them. Catherine had expected many things from this encounter. Anger, defensiveness, perhaps even a continuation of the cold indifference he had shown her all those years ago. She hadn't expected this immediate acknowledgement of wrongdoing, this apparent remorse that seemed genuine in its rawness. "You were my daughter," he said, his eyes filling with tears, "my only child. And when you needed me most, when you were scared and pregnant and needed your father's love and support, I failed you completely. I chose my reputation over your welfare. I chose what people would think over what my daughter needed." Catherine moved slightly closer to the bed, drawn by something in his voice that she had never heard before. vulnerability, genuine regret. The sound of a man confronting his deepest failures without excuses or justifications. "Why now?" she asked softly, her first words since entering the room. "Why wait until you're dying to say these things?" Chapter 5. The Weight of Shame. Her father closed his eyes as if gathering strength for what he needed to say next. When he opened them again, Catherine saw something she had never seen before in his gaze, not just regret, but a deep, soul-crushing shame that seemed to have aged him beyond his 78 years. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "Because admitting I was wrong meant admitting that I had destroyed my daughter's life for no good reason. Because every year that passed made it harder to face what I had done until it seemed impossible to undo." He paused, struggling with his breathing for a moment before continuing. "After you entered the convent, I told myself I had saved our family's reputation. I told myself that you were better off there, that you would find peace and purpose in religious life. I convinced myself that forcing you into that choice was actually a kindness, a way of protecting you from a world that would judge you harshly for your mistake." Catherine felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. "My mistake? I was 18 years old, pregnant and terrified, and you called it a mistake that needed to be hidden away?" "Yes," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "And that was my failure, not yours. An 18-year-old girl who finds herself pregnant isn't making a mistake. She's facing a difficult situation that requires love and support, not judgment and banishment. I failed to give you what you needed because I was more concerned with what other people would think than with what my daughter was going through." The honesty of his admission caught Catherine off guard. She had prepared herself for excuses, for continued justification of his actions, for the same cold indifference that had marked their relationship before she entered the convent. Instead, she was hearing a complete acknowledgement of his failures as a father. "I wrote to you," she said quietly. "For the first year, I wrote to you every month. I told you about my life in the convent, about the work I was doing, about how I was trying to find peace with the path you had forced me onto. You never answered a single letter." "I kept every one," he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks now. "Every letter is in a box in my bedroom at home. I read them over and over, but I could never bring myself to write back because I didn't know how to apologize for what I had done. I didn't know how to bridge the gap I had created." Chapter 6. The Untold Story. Catherine moved closer to the bed, pulled by an emotion she couldn't quite name. Her father's genuine remorse was dismantling the protective wall of resentment she had built around her heart over the decades. She had spent so many years imagining him as callous and unfeeling, but the man before her seemed genuinely tortured by his past actions. "There's something else," he said, his voice growing even weaker. "Something I never told you. Something that makes what I did to you even worse than you know." Catherine felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. After 25 years of believing she knew the full extent of her father's betrayal, what more could there be? "After your mother died," he began slowly, "I was lost. Completely lost. She was the moral center of our family, the one who made the difficult decisions with love and wisdom. When she was gone, I felt like I was failing at everything, as a father, as a man, as someone worthy of the family we had built together." He paused, seemingly gathering strength for what came next. 6 months before you got pregnant, I made a mistake of my own. I had an affair with a woman from the next town over. It lasted 3 months, and when it ended, she told me she was pregnant." Catherine's world tilted. This was not what she had expected to hear. Her father, the man who had condemned her for her teenage pregnancy, had fathered a child outside of marriage as a grown man, a widower who should have known better. "I paid her to move away," he continued, his voice thick with shame. I gave her money to disappear and never contact me again. I never even knew if she really was pregnant or if it was just a way to get money from me. But Catherine, when you came to me with your news 6 months later, I saw my own sin reflected in your situation. And instead of feeling compassion for what you were going through, I felt rage at being reminded of my own failure. The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. Her father hadn't just been a hypocrite. He'd been a man running from his own guilt and shame, and he had taken that shame out on her when she needed him most. "So, when you punished me," she said slowly, "you were really punishing yourself." "Yes," he whispered, "and that makes what I did to you unforgivable." Chapter 7. The Child. She never knew. The silence in the room stretched between them as Catherine processed this new information. Her entire understanding of her banishment to the convent had just shifted, fundamentally. She had spent decades believing her father had rejected her out of moral righteousness, when in reality he had been consumed by guilt over his own similar transgression. "What happened to my baby?" she asked suddenly, the question that had haunted her for 25 years finally finding voice. "You arranged everything so quickly, had me in the convent within weeks of learning about the pregnancy. What happened to my child?" Her father's face crumpled with fresh pain. "You gave birth to a daughter. I was there when she was born at the hospital affiliated with the convent. She was beautiful, Catherine. She had your eyes and your stubborn little chin." Catherine's hands flew to her mouth as tears began streaming down her face. In all the years since entering the convent, no one had ever told her whether she had given birth to a son or daughter, whether the child had been healthy, what had become of her baby. The not knowing had been its own special torture. "I arranged for her adoption through the church," he continued, "a Catholic family from the city, a couple who had been trying to have children for years. The father was a doctor, the mother was a teacher. They seemed like good people who would provide her with opportunities and love. Did you ever try to find out what happened to her?" "Every year on her birthday," he admitted. "I hired a private investigator when she turned 5, then again when she turned 10, 15, and 20. I have reports about her life, about how she's doing. She's thriving, Catherine. She's doing well." Catherine felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her father had information about her daughter who was now 25 years old, while she had spent a quarter century wondering if her child was even alive. "You've been watching my daughter for 20 years and never told me." "I didn't think I had the right," he said. "I had already taken so much from you. I thought knowing about her might make your pain worse, might make it harder for you to find peace in your religious life." "That wasn't your decision to make," Catherine said, her voice rising with emotion. "She was my daughter. I had a right to know she was safe, happy, thriving. You took that from me too." Chapter 8. The Reports. Her father gestured weakly toward the bedside table. "In my wallet there's a business card. It has the private investigator's contact information. And at home, in my desk drawer, there are files with reports about her life. Pictures too, from when she was little, school photos, graduation pictures, even some recent ones." Catherine's hands shook as she retrieved the wallet and found the card. "James Morrison, private investigator." The small piece of cardboard felt impossibly heavy in her hands. It represented a connection to the daughter she had never been allowed to know. "Her name is Sarah," her father continued softly. "Sarah Michelle Collins. Her adoptive parents named her after her adoptive grandmother and after your mother. I asked them to include Michelle as a middle name to honor the grandmother she would never know." The fact that her father had ensured her daughter carried her mother's name as a middle name was a small comfort that somehow made the pain even more acute. It showed he had been thinking of their family, of continuity and connection, even as he was severing those very bonds by keeping Catherine in the dark. "She went to college," he said, his voice growing softer as exhaustion took hold. "Graduated with honors with a degree in social work. She's married now to a good man named David. They have a little boy, Catherine. You're a grandmother." The words hit her like lightning. A grandmother. She had a grandson she had never met, would probably never meet. Her daughter was married, had built a life, had become a mother herself, all while Catherine prayed for her in a convent, not even knowing her name. "How old is my grandson?" she asked through her tears. 2. "His name is Michael. He has red hair like you did when you were little." Catherine sank into the chair beside the bed, overwhelmed by the weight of these revelations. 25 years of missing her daughter's entire life. Her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding, the birth of her own child. 25 years of milestone moments that could never be recovered. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Why give me this information when you're dying, when it's too late to do anything about it?" "Because I realized that taking this secret to my grave would be the cruelest thing I could do to you," he said. "You deserve to know about your daughter, about your grandson. You deserve to have the choice I never gave you, the choice of whether to reach out to them or not." Chapter 9. The Final Truth. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine remained by her father's bedside, processing the avalanche of information he had shared. Nurses came and went, checking his vitals and adjusting his medications, but the crucial conversation continued between father and daughter, who were finally being honest with each other after decades of silence. "There's one more thing," her father said as evening approached, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Something that changes everything about why I really sent you to the convent." Catherine braced herself for another revelation, wondering what more there could possibly be to this story that had already rewritten everything she thought she knew about her past. The couple who adopted Sarah, Dr. and Mrs. Collins, they couldn't have children because Mrs. Collins had lost 3 babies to miscarriage. When I arranged Sarah's adoption, they were so grateful, so desperate for a child, that they offered to pay not just the legal fees, but additional money for what they called your care during your recovery. Catherine frowned, not understanding where this was leading. "They offered me $10,000, he continued, his voice filled with shame. "It was 1998, and $10,000 was a significant amount of money. I was struggling financially after your mother's medical bills, after the costs of her funeral, after missing so much work while caring for her. I was behind on the mortgage, behind on credit card payments, drowning in debt." The truth hit Catherine like a slap. "You took money for my baby. I told myself it was for your care, for making sure you were provided for in the convent," he said, tears streaming down his face. "But the truth is, I used most of it to pay off debts. I used my daughter's baby to solve my financial problems." Catherine stood up abruptly, pacing to the window as she tried to process this final devastating piece of information. Her father hadn't just forced her into the convent out of shame or moral outrage. He had profited from it. He had sold her daughter and then shipped Catherine away to hide the evidence of his transaction. "So when you sent me to the convent," she said slowly, "you weren't just hiding my shame. You were hiding your own financial desperation and the fact that you had essentially sold your granddaughter." "Yes," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Catherine. I'm so sorry." The apology felt inadequate in the face of such betrayal, but Catherine could see that her father was genuinely consumed by remorse. The man in the hospital bed was not the same person who had made those choices 25 years ago. He was broken by the weight of his own actions, destroyed by the knowledge of what he had taken from his daughter. Chapter 10. Forgiveness and Understanding. As night fell outside the hospital window, Catherine returned to the chair beside her father's bed. The room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of the monitors and her father's labored breathing. She could see that he was weakening rapidly, that their time together was measured in hours, possibly less. "I don't know how to forgive you," she said honestly. "I don't know how to reconcile the father I needed with the man who made those choices. You didn't just take away my choice about the convent. You took away my daughter, my chance to know my grandson, 25 years of a life I never got to live." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Catherine. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that you know the truth, all of it, so that you can make decisions about your future based on facts instead of the lies I've let you believe all these years." Catherine looked at this dying man who had shaped her life so profoundly through his failures and weaknesses. She thought about the years she had spent in the convent, the peace she had eventually found there, the purpose she had discovered in serving others. Had those years been worthless because they had been forced upon her, or had she managed to create something meaningful, despite the circumstances? "The convent," she said slowly. "It did become home for me. I found purpose there, peace, a community of women who became my family. I'm not saying what you did was right, but I'm not sure I would trade the life I've built there, even knowing the truth about how I ended up there." Her father's eyes widened slightly. "You're not saying you're grateful I forced you there?" "No," she said firmly. "I'm saying that despite your intentions, despite the money, despite all the ways you failed me, I managed to build a meaningful life. I found God there, not because you forced me to, but because I chose to seek peace in the midst of pain. The life I built in the convent is mine, regardless of how I got there." "And Sarah? Will you try to contact her?" Catherine thought about her daughter, now a grown woman with her own family, her own life. Did she have the right to disrupt that life by appearing as the birth mother who had given her up? Did Sarah even know she was adopted? Would contact be a gift or a burden? "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's a decision I'll have to make carefully, with a lot of prayer and consideration for what's best for her, not just what I want." Oh. Chapter 11. The final hour's dawn was breaking outside the hospital window when Catherine's father took his last breath. She had remained by his side through the night, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring apologies or speaking her mother's name. In his final moments, he looked peaceful for the first time since she had arrived, as if finally telling the truth had lifted a burden he had carried for decades. Catherine sat quietly for several minutes after the monitors fell silent, looking at the face of the man who had been both the greatest source of pain and the indirect catalyst for her spiritual journey. She felt an unexpected sense of closure, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Her father had been a flawed, weak man who had made terrible decisions out of fear, shame, and desperation. Those decisions had profoundly damaged their relationship and altered the course of her life, but they had also led her to a path of service and faith that had given her purpose. As she prepared to leave the hospital, Catherine clutched the private investigator's business card and thought about the choice that lay before her. She had a daughter out there, a daughter who was now 25 years old, married, and a mother herself. She had a grandson she had never met. The question was whether reaching out would be an act of love or selfishness, whether it would add something meaningful to Sarah's life or simply disrupt the peace and stability she had built. On the taxi ride back to the convent, Catherine made a decision. She would not contact Sarah immediately. Instead, she would spend time in prayer and reflection, perhaps even seek counsel from Mother Superior and the other sisters who had become her family. She would research Sarah's life more thoroughly, trying to understand whether her daughter even knew she was adopted, whether contact would be welcome or traumatic. But she would not let another 25 years pass without making a decision. Her father's deathbed confession had given her information and choices he had denied her for decades. She would use those gifts wisely, but she would use them. The truth, painful as it was, had set her free to make her own decisions about her future for the first time since she was 18 years old. As the convent came into view, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion. She had faced her past, learned the full truth about her father's failures and her daughter's life, and now she could move forward with clarity and purpose. Whatever came next, it would be her choice to make.